January 12th, 1888, 7 in the morning. The temperature in Nebraska was 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Children went to school without coats. Men worked outside in their shirt sleeves. Women hung laundry to dry in the sun. It was the warmest January day anyone could remember. By 3 in the afternoon, it was 40 below zero. In 8 hours, without warning, without forecast, without any way to know what was coming. A wall of frozen air from Canada hit the Great Plains at 60 miles per hour. The sky turned white. The temperature dropped 100 degrees in 24 hours. And 213 children never made it home from school that day. This is the story of the deadliest blizzard in American history, and the teachers, farmers, and children who fought to survive it. Welcome to old American ways. Before we go back to 1888, if you love the real stories of how Americans survived the impossible, subscribe right now. This channel exists for exactly this: the forgotten people, the extreme conditions, the survival knowledge that history almost lost. It's like if that temperature drop, 100 degrees in 24 hours, stopped your breath for a second. And share this with someone who thinks they know what a real blizzard is. Now, let's go back to the Great Plains. January 12th, 1888, and a morning that started like any other. To understand what happened on January 12th, 1888, you need to understand the world that was hit. The Great Plains in the 1880s were in the middle of the greatest land rush in American history. The Homestead Act of 1862 had given free land, 160 acres, to anyone willing to settle the vast, flat, treeless prairie of Nebraska and the Dakota Territory. Thousands of families came from the eastern United States, from Germany, Sweden, Norway. From Ireland and Bohemia, they built sod houses, homes made of cut prairie grass, and because there were no trees for lumber. They dug wells by hand. They plowed the prairie with horses. They built one-room schoolhouses every few miles across the plains so that no child had to walk more than a mile or two to school. These were not wealthy settlers. These were families who had bet everything on a piece of flat land in a place most of them had never seen before. And they were not prepared for what the Great Plains winter could do, because in January 1888, there was no National Weather Service as we know it today. There was no radio, no telephone. In most rural areas, no way to transmit a warning fast enough to reach the farmers and their children before the storm did. There was a weather observer in Huron, Dakota Territory, who saw the storm coming. He sent a telegraph warning. The warning arrived in some towns after the storm did. So, on the morning of January 12th, when the temperature rose to near 50 degrees and the sun came out, no one on the Great Plains knew that 200 miles to the northwest, an Arctic air mass the size of 3 states was moving toward them at 60 miles per hour. No one knew that by afternoon, the world they knew would be completely gone. 2 p.m. January 12th, 1888. In Huron, Dakota Territory, the temperature was 41 degrees. Children were playing outside during their lunch recess. At 2:15, a teacher named Seymour Dopp looked out the window of his school in Pawnee City, Nebraska. He saw something on the horizon that he had never seen before. A wall, not of snow, not of clouds, a wall of white moving toward him. Faster than he had ever seen anything move. He had 17 students in his school. He made a decision in that moment that saved every one of their lives. He closed the school. He kept every child inside. He had them pile wood onto the stove as fast as they could. And he told them, no matter what happened, No one was going home, not today. Within minutes, the wall hit. The temperature dropped 18 degrees in 3 minutes. Survivors described it as a sound like a freight train, then a wall of white so thick and so fast that you could not see your hand in front of your face. The fine particles of snow and ice penetrated clothing instantly, froze eyelashes shut, froze nostrils, made breathing difficult. Winds gusted to 60 miles per hour, creating a wind chill that made the air feel like 60 below zero. At those temperatures, exposed skin freezes in 30 seconds. A person who becomes disoriented in the whiteout, who loses their sense of direction in the blinding white, can wander in circles and freeze to death within 200 yards of safety. This is what happened to hundreds of people on the Great Plains on the afternoon of January 12th, 1888. They stepped outside on thinking they could make it. They became disoriented in the white, and they never found their way back. Now let me tell you about the people, because this storm was not an abstraction, it was not a statistic. It was a collection of individual human beings making decisions in seconds that would determine whether they lived or died. And the decisions they made, and the decisions they couldn't make, tell us everything about what survival really means. Let's start with Minnie Freeman. Minnie Freeman was 19 years old, a schoolteacher in Mira Valley, Nebraska. She had 13 students in her one-room schoolhouse when the blizzard hit. The storm tore the roof off her building, not damaged it, tore it completely off, with 13 children in her care. In 40 below zero temperatures, in a building that was now open to the sky, Minnie Freeman did not panic. She tied a rope to the school building. She tied the other end to the nearest shelter, a farmhouse a quarter-mile away. She lined up her students. She put the smallest children in the middle, and one by one, holding the rope, she walked every single one of them to safety. All 13, not one lost. The newspapers called her the Nebraska heroine. A song was written about her, Song of the Great Blizzard. 13 were saved. She became famous across the country. She was 19 years old, and she saved 13 lives with a piece of rope and a clear head. Now let me tell you about Lois Royce. Lois Royce was also a teenage school teacher. She was trapped in her school with 3 students, 2 9-year-olds and a 6-year-old. When the wood ran out, when the school became too cold to survive the night, she made a decision. Her boarding house was 75 meters away, 75 meters, the length of a football field. She took the 3 children and stepped outside. The whiteout was total. There was no up, no down, no left, no right, just white. She became lost immediately, wandering in the storm, 75 meters from safety. The 3 children she was trying to save froze to death in the snow. Lois Royce survived, but both of her feet had to be amputated from frostbite. She learned to walk again on artificial limbs. 2 teachers, 2 teenage girls, 2 identical situations. One found a rope, one stepped out without one. The difference between Minnie Freeman and Lois Royce is not courage. Both were courageous beyond measure. The difference is one piece of rope and the knowledge that in a whiteout, you never step outside without something to guide you back. That is survival knowledge, the kind that cannot be taught in a classroom, only by experience or by hearing the stories of those who came before. The people who survived the blizzard of 1888 didn't survive by luck. They survived because of knowledge, specific, hard-earned knowledge about cold, about snow, and about the deceptive nature of a whiteout. And the contrast between those who knew these things and those who didn't is one of the most powerful survival lessons in American history. Here is what the survivors knew. Lesson 1. Never leave shelter without a guide rope. This is the most important rule of surviving a whiteout. The human sense of direction is completely destroyed by the visual white of a blizzard. The inner ear, which normally helps us maintain direction, cannot override the visual confusion of seeing only white in every direction. Within minutes of stepping into a whiteout, even experienced outdoorsmen become completely disoriented. The settlers who knew this tied ropes between their building, between the house and the barn, between the school and the nearest farm, before the storms came. Seymour Dopp knew this. Minnie Freeman improvised it. The settlers who died didn't know it or forgot it. Lesson 2. Never let yourself get wet. When temperatures drop to 40 below, moisture on clothing becomes a death sentence. Wet clothing loses 90% of its insulating value. The body's heat is drawn away 25 times faster through wet fabric than through dry air. The settlers who survived stayed dry inside their sod houses, their barns, their schoolhouses. The ones who tried to move, who sweated from the effort of walking through deep snow in extreme cold, created the moisture that killed them. Lesson 3. Burn everything you can reach. In a life-threatening cold emergency, nothing else matters. Seymour Dopp's students burned every piece of wood in the school, then the furniture, then the floorboards. By morning, there was nothing left to burn. But they were alive. The settlers in sod houses burned dried buffalo chips, the dried dung of the buffalo that had once covered the plains. It burned hot and long. Those who had collected enough of it survived. Those who hadn't, in some cases, didn't. These 3 lessons, the rope, staying dry, burning everything, were not discovered by scientists. They were discovered by ordinary people in the worst moments of their lives, and they are still true today. In any blizzard, in any extreme cold survival situation, the knowledge hasn't changed, we just forgot to teach it. When the storm finally ended on the morning of January 13th, the Great Plains looked like the surface of the moon. 5-foot snowdrifts covered everything. The state of Nebraska took 2 weeks to dig itself out, and when the newspapers finally assembled the full picture, from isolated farms and ranches and schoolhouses across the plains, the numbers were devastating. Estimates on the loss of life run from around 200 to nearly 1,000. 109 lives were lost in Dakota Territory alone. 213 children never made it home from school, and for years afterward, at gatherings of any size in Dakota or Nebraska, there would always be people walking on wooden legs or holding fingerless hands behind their backs or hiding missing ears under hats. Victims of the blizzard. Everyone had a story. Everyone had lost someone. The blizzard changed the Great Plains forever. Communities built stronger schoolhouses. Settlers strung rope lines between their buildings before winter came. The federal government modernized its weather forecasting system. And the survivors, the ones who made it through, organized a club decades later and met every year to tell their stories. Because they understood something that we sometimes forget in our heated homes and our weather apps and our instant communications. The difference between surviving and not surviving is almost never about strength, it's about knowledge, the right knowledge, at the right moment. Minnie Freeman had a rope, and 13 children lived. That is the whole story. This has been Old American Ways. Subscribe if these survival stories matter to you, because next week we go to another impossible situation that real Americans survived, and the knowledge they used to do it. Old American Ways, where the past is never truly gone.